I never thought I'd be the kind of guy posting a story like this, but here I am, pouring my heart out to strangers on the internet. It's funny, really, how your life can feel so stable, so secure, until one tiny crack appears and everything comes crashing down. That's what happened to me. I thought I had it all, a loving wife, a comfortable home, and a future I could count on. But as it turns out, I was living in a lie. And it all started unraveling because of something as mundane as a car's GPS logbook. Marriage is a funny thing. You enter it with grand ideals, shared dreams, unshakable trust, and the belief that you'll grow old together, hand in hand. That's how it was for Laura and me. Or at least, that's what I thought. We met during our final year of college. She was this whirlwind of energy, always smiling, always bringing light to any room she entered. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Her laughter had this infectious quality, and her presence was magnetic. We were inseparable almost from the moment we met, and within 3 years, we were married. Our life together was, by all accounts, picture perfect. We had a cozy home, steady jobs, and the kind of connection people envied. We weren't flashy, but we were comfortable, happy, or so I believed. Laura had always been close to her childhood friend, Mark. I never saw it as anything more than a platonic bond. They'd grown up together, attended the same schools, and even shared childhood secrets that were practically incomprehensible to anyone else. Mark was harmless. That's how I thought of him. He wasn't particularly handsome, successful, or charismatic, just a good guy who had been part of Laura's life forever. They had a bond, yes, but it was one I never felt threatened by. Laura made it clear that their relationship was nothing more than friendship, and I had no reason to doubt her. We were also modern, forward-thinking people. A few years ago, when electric cars started becoming more popular, we decided to get one. It was sleek, efficient, and a nod to our commitment to sustainability. Laura was the one who used it most often. Her job as a freelance designer gave her a lot of flexibility, and she often ran errands or visited friends while I was at work. The car became a silent part of our lives, a tool we never thought much about. But as I would later learn, even the most mundane parts of life can hold dark secrets. Our days were a routine of quiet bliss. I'd wake up early, make coffee for us, and kiss her on the forehead before heading out. She'd spend her mornings working on projects or meeting clients, and in the evenings, we'd share stories about our day over dinner. On weekends, we'd binge-watch shows or take long drives in the countryside. I loved those drives, just the two of us, windows down, music playing, and the world passing by. But recently, something felt off. It was subtle at first, like the faintest shift in the wind. Laura had started to seem distracted. She'd stare at her phone longer than usual, smile at texts she wouldn't share, and occasionally excuse herself to take calls in another room. When I asked, she brushed it off as work-related. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation of our relationship, and I never thought to question it. Mark had also been popping up more frequently in conversations. Mark said this, or Mark recommended that. They'd always been close, but lately it seemed like they were in constant communication. Again, I didn't think much of it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, they were childhood friends. It wasn't unusual for them to stay in touch. Then there were the errands. Laura started going out more often, always with some plausible reason, picking up supplies, meeting a client, or helping Mark with something. She was always vague about the details, but I didn't press her. I trusted her, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who doubted his wife over every little thing. Looking back, there were signs I missed. The nights she'd come home later than expected, the sudden effort she put into her appearance before casual outings, and the way she seemed almost guilty when I hugged her after a long day. At the time, I wrote it all off as stress or coincidence. I didn't want to see what was right in front of me. There was one evening that sticks out in my memory. We were having dinner, and I casually mentioned that we should invite Mark over sometime. Laura's reaction was strange. She hesitated, her fork hovering midair, before forcing a smile and saying, Sure, that sounds nice. Her voice was light, but her eyes betrayed something else, nervousness, maybe even fear. It was gone in an instant, but it left a strange taste in my mouth. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Mark more than usual. I tried to remember the last time I'd actually seen him. It had been months. For someone who was apparently such a big part of Laura's life, he seemed oddly absent from mine. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was overthinking things. Laura and I had been together for over a decade. If there was one thing I could count on, it was her loyalty. At least, that's what I told myself. Our perfect routine continued, but the cracks were starting to show. Little moments of doubt, fleeting but persistent, began to creep into my mind. I'd catch myself watching Laura out of the corner of my eye, trying to decipher the subtle changes in her behavior. She was still the woman I loved, but there was a distance between us now, a gap I couldn't explain or bridge. It wasn't until later that I realized how deep that gap truly was, and how much of our perfect life was built on a foundation of lies. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back now, I can see how blind I was to the cracks forming right in front of me. But at the time, it was easier to explain them away than to face the truth. Suspicion is an uncomfortable thing, especially when it creeps into a relationship you thought was built on trust. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. It started with little things. The kind of moments you'd normally brush off because they seem too trivial to mean anything. A missed text, a vague explanation, a glance that lingered just a little too long. But once those moments pile up, they become impossible to ignore. That's how it was with Laura. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She used to leave it lying around the house, unlocked, like it was just another appliance. But lately, she was never more than an arm's reach away from it. I'd see her pick it up the moment it buzzed, her thumb gliding across the screen with practiced ease. When I asked her who she was texting, she'd give me a breezy, "Oh, just work stuff," or, "It's nothing important." And I believed her, at first. But it wasn't just the phone. It was her demeanor. Laura had always been attentive, someone who listened to every word I said and made me feel like the most important person in the world. Now, her mind seemed elsewhere. We'd be sitting on the couch, watching one of our favorite shows, and I'd catch her staring off into space, her expression unreadable. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd snap back to reality with a smile and say, "Of course. Just tired." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then there were the trips to Mark's house. Laura and Mark had always been close, but their visits were usually few and far between: birthdays, holidays, or the occasional catch-up lunch. Now, it seemed like she was there every other day. "Mark's going through a tough time," she explained one evening as she slipped on her shoes. "He just needs someone to talk to. Do you want me to come with you?" I offered, more out of politeness than any real desire to tag along. She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. "No, it's fine. He's, private about these things." I didn't press her. Why would I? Mark had always been a little introverted, and if Laura was helping him through something, I wasn't going to stand in her way. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone was too casual, too rehearsed, like she'd practiced the line in her head before saying it out loud. As the weeks went on, her absences became more frequent. She'd leave for quick errands, and come back hours later with vague explanations about traffic or running into someone she knew. One Saturday, she told me she was meeting a client at a nearby cafe. When I offered to join her for a coffee, she hesitated before saying, "It's probably best if I go alone. It's a business thing, you know?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, no problem." But it was a problem. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started paying more attention, noticing things I'd overlooked before. Like the way she always seemed to check her reflection in the mirror before leaving the house, even for something as simple as a grocery run. Or the way her perfume lingered just a little longer, as if she'd sprayed it on more liberally than usual. One evening, I found myself scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the nagging doubts in my mind. I ended up on social media, scrolling through photos of friends and family. I decided to check Mark's profile, something I hadn't done in years. His posts were as dull as ever, blurry photos of his dog, random memes, and the occasional status update about his day. But one post caught my eye. It was a photo of his living room, captioned, "Late night movie with good company." In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was Laura's handbag. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. She told me she was at a client meeting that night. I wanted to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that she must have stopped by Mark's place afterward. But the timing didn't add up. She hadn't mentioned seeing him at all that evening. I decided to confront her about it, but when she came home later that night, her mood was so light and cheerful that I couldn't bring myself to ruin it. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and laughed at one of my dumb jokes. For a moment, I convinced myself that I was overthinking everything, that I was the one creating problems where there were none. But the doubts didn't go away. If anything, they grew louder. I started noticing how often she mentioned Mark in passing, his name peppered into conversations, almost as if she wanted to keep him on my radar without making it seem like a big deal. Mark recommended this book. Or, Mark told me about this new restaurant we should try. It was subtle, but it was there. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was being irrational, paranoid. After all, Laura had never given me a reason not to trust her. But the signs were piling up, and they were getting harder to ignore. One night, as I lay awake in bed, listening to the soft rhythm of Laura's breathing, I found myself replaying the past few weeks in my mind. Every missed call, every vague excuse, every too long trip to Mark's house. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it wasn't one I wanted to see. I decided I needed proof, something concrete to either confirm my suspicions or put them to rest once and for all. Little did I know, the proof was closer than I realized. It was sitting in our driveway, hidden in the logbook of our electric car, waiting to shatter the illusion of our perfect life. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. Sometimes, it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. For me, that moment came on a quiet Saturday morning, when I stumbled upon something that changed everything. They say ignorance is bliss, but once you've seen the truth, there's no going back. The day started like any other. Laura had left early, saying she was meeting a client downtown. I'd planned to spend the morning catching up on some overdue housework. It was the kind of mundane, unremarkable day where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. I decided to take the electric car for a service check. It had been a few months since its last maintenance, and I figured it was time to make sure everything was running smoothly. I wasn't particularly car-savvy, but the dealership had provided a simple diagnostic app that could connect to the car's onboard system and flag any issues. All I had to do was plug my phone into the car's dashboard and let the app do its thing. I went out to the driveway, unlocked the car, and climbed into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of Laura's perfume lingered in the air, a soft, floral fragrance that I'd always associated with her. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt for the doubts that had been eating away at me. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe Laura was exactly who she'd always been, and I was the one letting paranoia cloud my judgment. But as I connected my phone to the car's system and opened the diagnostic app, something unexpected caught my attention. The app had a feature I'd never used before, a GPS history log. It displayed a detailed record of every trip the car had taken in the past 3 months, complete with timestamps and destinations. I hadn't even known the car could do that. At first, I hesitated. This felt like crossing a line, like prying into something I had no right to see. But then I remembered all the late nights, the vague excuses, the growing distance between us. If there was nothing to hide, then I wasn't doing anything wrong. That's what I told myself as I tapped on the GPS log and began scrolling through the entries. Most of the destinations were familiar: the grocery store, Laura's favorite cafe, the gym. But one address kept appearing over and over again. It wasn't a place I recognized, and it didn't match any of the locations Laura had mentioned in her daily routines. My stomach tightened as I copied the address into a Maps app on my phone. When the results loaded, my heart sank. It was Mark's house. The logbook showed dozens of trips to his address, sometimes multiple times in a single week. The timestamps were equally damning, coinciding with times Laura had claimed to be elsewhere. Errands, client meetings, coffee runs, they were all lies. The evidence was staring me in the face, undeniable and impossible to ignore. I sat there in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process what I was seeing. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or had it crossed into something physical? Did Mark even feel guilty, or was he complicit in betraying the trust I'd placed in both of them? I wanted to believe there was some other explanation, some innocent reason for all those trips. Maybe Mark really was going through a tough time, and Laura was just being a supportive friend. But deep down, I knew better. The frequency, the secrecy, it didn't add up. I was staring at the proof of something I'd been too afraid to admit. Laura was cheating on me. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at the screen as if the data might somehow change if I looked hard enough. A part of me wanted to confront Laura immediately, to demand answers and force her to explain herself. But another part of me held back. If I confronted her now, she might deny everything, twist the story, or find a way to make me doubt the evidence. I needed more. I needed the truth, the whole truth laid bare. That night, Laura came home with the same bright smile she always wore, her voice cheerful as she asked how my day had been. I forced myself to act normal, to play the part of the oblivious husband. But inside, I was unraveling. Every word she said felt like a lie, every gesture like a calculated move in some twisted game. I couldn't even look at her without imagining her with Mark, laughing, touching, sharing the kind of intimacy that should have been reserved for us. I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to everything Laura did. I noted the times she left the house, the places she claimed to go, and the amount of time she spent on her phone. I started cross-referencing her explanations with the GPS log, and the pattern became painfully clear. Whenever she said she was running errands or meeting a client, the car's history told a different story. She was with him. One afternoon, while Laura was out, I found myself staring at her phone, which she'd left charging on the kitchen counter. The screen was locked, and I didn't know her passcode. But I didn't need to. A notification popped up, a text from Mark. "Same time tomorrow?" My chest tightened as I stared at the message. It was simple, innocuous even, but it confirmed everything I'd feared. They were planning to meet again, right under my nose. I felt a surge of anger, not just at Laura and Mark, but at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I missed the signs for so long? I'd trusted her, loved her, built a life with her, and this was how she repaid me. That night, as Laura slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing with plans and questions. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The evidence was piling up, and it was only a matter of time before the dam broke. But I needed to confront her on my terms, with all the facts in hand. I needed her to see that I wasn't blind, that I wasn't a fool. I didn't know how the confrontation would go or what it would mean for our marriage. All I knew was that the truth was out, and there was no turning back. There's a moment in every betrayal where the illusion finally shatters, where the lies and excuses can no longer hold together the facade. For me, that moment came when I decided I couldn't live in the shadows of doubt any longer. The confrontation wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself that her betrayal had broken. I wasn't prepared for how it would unfold, but I knew it was inevitable. I'd always imagined confrontations as dramatic, like something out of a movie. Raised voices, slammed doors, accusations flying back and forth. But as I prepared myself to confront Laura, I realized it wasn't going to be like that. My anger wasn't fiery and explosive. It was cold and deliberate, simmering beneath the surface. I didn't want to yell or lash out. I wanted clarity, answers, and above all, the truth. I spent the night before going over the evidence again, replaying every detail in my mind. The GPS log, the texts, the suspicious behavior, it all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. I wasn't going to let her manipulate or gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. This time, I had the proof. Laura came home late that evening, her hair slightly tousled, a faint hint of perfume lingering in the air. She looked surprised to find me sitting in the living room, waiting for her. Usually, I'd be in bed by then, reading or scrolling through my phone. "Hey," she said, her voice light and casual. "You're up late. I needed to talk to you," I replied, my tone even. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly as she set her bag down by the door. "Okay, what's going on?" I gestured for her to sit across from me. She complied, but there was a tension in her movements, a subtle unease that hadn't been there before. "Where were you tonight?" I asked. Her brow furrowed. "I told you, I had a client meeting." "Why? Which client?" She paused, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning in her head, the faint flicker of panic in her eyes. "Does it matter?" she finally said, forcing a smile. "It was just work stuff." "It matters," I said firmly. "Because the car's GPS log says you were at Mark's house." Her face went pale. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "What?" "You heard me," I said, holding her gaze. "I checked the log. It shows every trip you've taken in the past 3 months. Do you want to guess how many times you've been to Mark's house?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and she avoided my eyes. "It's not what you think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded. "Explain why you've been lying to me, why you've been sneaking around behind my back. Tell me what's really going on." She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her lies was finally too much to bear. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "Mark, he's been going through a lot, and I was just trying to be there for him. One thing led to another and—" "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You betrayed me. You lied to me. How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked down at her hands. "A few months," she admitted. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but I forced myself to stay calm. "A few months," I repeated. "And you never thought to tell me? You never thought to come clean and end this before it got out of hand?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know how to stop. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store." I snapped. This was a choice. You made a choice every time you went to his house, every time you lied to my face. Don't you dare try to downplay it." She flinched at my words, the tears spilling over now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said, my voice cold. "Sorry doesn't erase the months of lies or the fact that you betrayed the trust we built together. How long have you been planning to keep this up? Or were you just hoping I'd never find out?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was stupid and selfish, and you didn't care about what it would do to me." I finished for her. She didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe her tears, her apologies, but I couldn't. The damage was done, and no amount of remorse could undo it. "Does he mean anything to you?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated, and in that moment I knew the answer. "I don't know," she said finally. "It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, shaking my head. "That's all you have to say?" "I never stopped loving you," she said, her voice desperate. "You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said. "You've hurt me more than you could ever imagine. And the worst part is, I don't even know if I can believe anything you're saying right now. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Please, she said, her voice breaking. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, or something. I'll do whatever it takes. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and felt a pang of grief for everything we'd lost. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what had been broken. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. You didn't just break my trust, I said finally. You broke us. And I don't know if that's something we can come back from. She sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the Laura I thought I knew. She was someone else, someone who had chosen to betray me in the worst possible way. That night, I slept on the couch, unable to face her or the empty shell of our marriage. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, things would never be the same again. Confronting Laura was supposed to bring closure, but instead, it opened a floodgate of emotions I wasn't prepared to handle. Anger, betrayal, grief, they all hit me in waves, each one more overwhelming than the last. The fallout wasn't just about the end of a marriage, it was about picking up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. The days following the confrontation felt like I was living in a fog. Laura tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the nights she'd spent with him, while I sat at home, oblivious. She texted me from the bedroom the morning after our confrontation. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I had so much I wanted to say, so many questions that demanded answers. But the thought of sitting across from her again, hearing her apologies and excuses, felt like more than I could bear. I left the message unread and focused on anything that would keep my mind occupied. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, taking on extra tasks just to fill the hours. My coworkers noticed the change, but I brushed off their concern with half-hearted smiles and vague reassurances. I wasn't ready to talk about it, not with them, not with anyone. At home, the silence was unbearable. Laura tried to act as if things were normal, but the tension was palpable. She'd make dinner and leave a plate for me, though I rarely touched it. She'd ask how my day was, and I'd respond with curt, one-word answers. The house that had once been filled with laughter and conversation now felt like a battleground, every interaction charged with unspoken pain. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, a stack of papers spread out on the coffee table. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and puffy. I've been thinking, she said, her voice tentative. About us. About everything. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past her into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she continued, following me. But I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I turned to face her, the glass still in my hand. And what does making things right look like to you? I've been looking into counseling, she said, her voice trembling. For us. For me. I know I need help, and I'm willing to do the work. I just need to know if you're willing to try. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was sincere. But how could I? The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Laura I thought I knew. She was a stranger, someone capable of betrayal on a scale I never thought possible. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally. I don't know if I want to. She nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. But please, just think about it. Please. I didn't respond. Instead, I left the room, retreating to the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping since the confrontation. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my chest heaving as I fought to keep the tears at bay. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as memories of our life together played in my mind like a cruel montage. Our wedding day, the vacations we'd taken, the nights we'd spent talking until dawn, it all felt like a cruel joke now, a lie wrapped in the illusion of happiness. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in limbo, caught between the life I'd built with Laura and the betrayal that had torn it apart. I needed clarity, closure, and a way to move forward, whatever that looked like. I reached out to a lawyer later that week. The process was daunting, but I knew it was the only way to regain control of my life. Laura's betrayal had taken so much from me, but I refused to let it define my future. When I told her I was filing for divorce, she broke down completely. She begged me to reconsider, to give her another chance. But my mind was made up. "This isn't just about what you did," I told her. "It's about what you destroyed. I can't go back to the way things were, and I don't think I want to." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Friends and family reached out as word of the divorce spread, offering their support and condolences. Some were shocked, others admitted they'd always thought something was off about Laura's relationship with Mark. Their words were both comforting and infuriating, comforting because I wasn't alone, infuriating because I'd been too blind to see it myself. Mark, of course, tried to reach out. He sent me a long, rambling message apologizing for what had happened and claiming he never meant to hurt me. I deleted it without responding. His words meant nothing to me. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find a semblance of peace. The house felt emptier without Laura, but it also felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. I redecorated, rearranged furniture, and purged the reminders of our life together. It was cathartic, a way of reclaiming my space and making it my own. Therapy became a lifeline. I'd been hesitant at first, unsure if I wanted to unpack the pain and anger I was carrying. But my therapist helped me see that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, it was about learning to live with it. There were still days when the grief hit me like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. But there were also days when I felt hopeful, when I could see a future beyond the pain. I began reconnecting with old friends, exploring hobbies I had neglected, and slowly, tentatively, imagining a life without Laura. The fallout of her betrayal was devastating, but it also forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. Our marriage hadn't been perfect, and I hadn't been perfect either. But I'd loved her with everything I had, and that love deserved better than the lies and deceit she'd given me in return. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. I'm learning to let go of the past, to accept the scars it's left behind, and to embrace the possibilities ahead. Healing isn't a straight path. It's messy, filled with setbacks and moments where you feel like you're right back at the start. But it's also liberating, a process of rediscovering yourself and finding strength in the places you least expect. Moving forward wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It was the only way I could truly live again. In the months after the divorce, I faced an unfamiliar stillness in my life. The house, stripped of Laura's presence, felt like a hollow shell. But as the days passed, I began to see it as a blank slate. Slowly, I transformed it, repainting walls, rearranging furniture, and making it feel like my own space again. Therapy remained a cornerstone of my recovery. My therapist encouraged me to let go of self-blame and focus on self-compassion. "Healing isn't about erasing the pain," she said, "but learning to live alongside it." That idea became my mantra as I navigated the turbulent emotions of grief and loss. Work and hobbies became my anchors. I threw myself into my job, taking on new challenges that reignited my sense of purpose. Outside of work, I rediscovered photography, an old interest I'd never had time to pursue. Capturing the beauty in everyday moments reminded me that life still held joy, even in the smallest things. My family and friends played a crucial role in pulling me out of the darkness. My brother invited me on a hiking trip, and I reconnected with old friends who reminded me that I wasn't defined by what had happened. Their unwavering support was a lifeline, grounding me when I felt untethered. There were hard days, of course, moments when the memories crept in, uninvited. But those moments grew fewer and less consuming. Over time, I began to find peace in the quiet and hope in the uncertainty of the future. One afternoon, while clearing out old files, I came across a photo of Laura and me from happier times. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a longing for what was. But then I realized that chapter of my life was over, and that was okay. The past didn't define me, it had shaped me, but it wasn't my whole story. I started to take small but meaningful steps forward. I joined a local volunteer group, channeling my energy into helping others. I deactivated old social media accounts where remnants of my life with Laura still lingered. Each action, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One day, driving home from work, I took the scenic route. The open road stretched before me, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the weight of betrayal, from the constant replay of what had gone wrong. When I pulled into the driveway, I looked at the house that had once felt so empty. It wasn't just a place to live anymore, it was a symbol of my resilience, a testament to my ability to rebuild. I don't know what the future holds, but I've learned that life doesn't end when things fall apart. It just changes. And as I stood there, breathing in the crisp evening air, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.